This is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. Today, I have joining me, besides Ben Kinsley, who is here as co-host and co-producer. Ben is the executive director for Campaign for Vermont, but I have Darrell Rogers. Darrell, it is an honor to have you here, seriously. Darrell is a youth motivational speaker and author, and he's here in Vermont at the bequest of Bob Orlick, who I had on my show during the campaign season. Bob was running as a representative. Is that right? I'm looking at Bob while the camera's going. Good. And Darrell is staying with Bob, and they have been going around to schools, hospitals to deliver your message. Is that?
A lot of different venues, including churches as well.
That's great. And it's mostly directed, I'm going to let you speak in a minute, but directed at children. Darrell has a very compelling story, which I know you will want to hear. And I'm just going to jump in. Could you give us a little background up until 2014 about who you are? And
my background is really in aviation. Started out right out of high school. I got a job as a corporate pilot, and eventually got into the military side of aviation. I was flying for a small commuter airline initially, and then on the military side, I was a helicopter pilot who flew the Apache AH-64.
Nice. I had the pleasure of riding in a helicopter, and if they would have taken me at 60, I would have enlisted. It was the most amazing experience. That's good for you. So you finished your service, and
I've owned a couple of different small businesses, and also had started a nonprofit and ran that for several years. It was a camp for boys, a day camp.
Nice.
But we were operated in the woods, and so we had that. Plus, a part of that program was something similar to a scouting program, but for at-risk boys.
Oh, nice. Oh, I bet they love that.
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Should have been around my house when I was chopping wood. It was scribble. So anyway, well, Ben, maybe you can start the conversation off a little bit about.
So I had the privilege of reading your book, which I found very interesting. But tell us a little bit about your son Chase and kind of what inspired you to write this book about your family and your son.
Chase, he was always very active. He was ADD, but I would say it was a mild case of ADD. In other words, he had some issues with focus in the classroom, but he was well behaved. He never got into trouble for, causing any problems at school. But just really good at sports. That ADD, I think, had a little something to do with that, in that he just had a lot of energy. Very quick and agile, and great hand-eye coordination. And as far as the book goes, I was looking for a way to deal with my grief after Chase died, and it was an outlet for me. It was a way for me to get some of my feelings out and get my feelings on paper. Initially, I wasn't angry, but then I kind of went through a season of anger, and some of that comes out, I think, a little bit in the book. But I got through that. But I also felt like I wanted to add meaning to Chase's death. I did not want his death to have been in vain, and so I was looking for a way to bring something positive out of what had happened there. And I thought, man, if I can share his story, and if it can impact other young people and help them to make better choices, then it'll be worth it.
And he had some exposure to the military also, right? He went to a military academy, got a little bit of exposure to that. And how do you think that affected him as a person as he was growing up?
Bob and I were just talking on the drive up here, and he was in Navy Junior ROTC in high school, and before he ever went to military school. And the reason I sent him to military school was that I felt like the structured environment and the discipline would be good for him, since he was having a little trouble with focus. And it did help him. I think it did help him because he graduated from high school, and I think it did kind of help him through a little rough spot there. But he really, I think at that point, once he got through there, I think he felt like he had had enough exposure to the military.
Yeah.
He didn't want any more of it,
Yeah.
But I think he had sort of a false impression of what the military was really all about at that point.
Well, it's interesting because I'm a graduate from a military college, and I did Navy ROTC at a private military college, and so I've had a fair amount of exposure to that culture, and it's definitely not for everyone. I
Right.
can say that, but it is good for a lot of people for the structure. And he was an athlete also there, as well as in earlier on in his career. And did he ever have any aspirations of pursuing athletics as either a career option? Because I understand he was very talented.
He was, but he had chosen football. He started out with baseball and then soccer, and did well at both. But he was really small for a football player, so he knew he would never play, professionally, not likely. So he did want to play college football and continue that on as long as he could. And he was very passionate about the sport. Every sport he ever played, he had a lot of heart. He played with heart. He gave it everything he had when he was on the field.
And so, what were his dreams and aspirations? Like, what did he want to be? What did he want to do? Like, what drove him as a person?
That's a good question. He definitely did have dreams to carry on, with his athletic career. He was, being a teenager, he really hadn't decided yet completely what he wanted to do. But I know that he was interested in. At one point, he was interested in the military until he went to a military school.
Yeah, that shows a lot of people. And tell you the dropout rate is astronomical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he went to college, he was going to be a criminal justice major. So, but he was still trying to figure it out. I can tell you this: he was very creative, and I had tried to encourage him to use some of his creative abilities, because on the cover of the book is a picture of him that he took himself with a cell phone, and he edited that using computer software he had never had any training in how to do. Made the eye brighter, but I mean, when you look at the picture, it's very artistic and it looks like a professional photographer did it. But aside from that, there was a lot of potential there that could have been tapped into in terms of the creative ability.
Well, and I think some of that comes through in the book. He's it's portrayed that he's creative and he's energetic and he's intelligent, and I think that does come through. And then clearly both he and your family struggled with addiction issues and recovery, and that's for anyone who's ever dealt with a family member who's going through that, it's really a cyclical thing. You get over it and then it's never a problem again. It's always something that you have to constantly work at. And can you tell us a little bit about what that was like for him as well as for your family as you were going through it?
That's something that really kind of caught me off guard. I really wasn't expecting that and didn't know anything about it, because there was nothing in our family history. There were no other people that I was aware of that had any addictions. And so it was, like I said, totally something brand new for me. I think that the hardest thing for parents, and I've said this several times this week in talking to other parents, is that when you have a child who is addicted, it's almost easier for me, as painful as it is having lost Chase, that part is almost easier going through that than the time when he was an addict and we were dealing with that, because there's so much uncertainty there. You don't know when that telephone is going to ring and you get the message. That's always in the back of your mind. The telephone's ringing, it's late at night. Is it the police? Is he in jail? Was he killed in a wreck? Did he overdose? And it's like you are in a grieving process then, even though he's still alive.
He didn't show any of the I guess, normal signs of grades going down, moodiness. But I don't know how, I think if you're not expecting, I don't know if you'd see it anyway. So I love when people say, well, didn't you notice? But hindsight's always 20/20. And
Right.
I did notice little things, but I couldn't verify that that
Right.
was what it was. You know, I thought maybe it was just a rebellious, teenager rebellious thing
Right.
that he was going through. I did see the grades slip a little bit and a little bit of an attitude.
Huh. Well, I just wanted to bring this conversation back. We've talked about your book. It's called A Life Half Lived. And as Darryl just said, the cover of the book is stark, and it's beautiful once you get into the book and read it. So I'm sure people have figured out, sadly, what's happened, but maybe you could bring 2014 into perspective for us and what started you on this journey.
2014 was May the 29th. And, taking it back just a little bit, Chase had gone to college on a football scholarship. It was a partial ride, but the school, it was a brand new football program. This was their inaugural season, and they had not established a drug testing policy. So there were students that at the school that were, a lot of students, and I'm sure this takes place at most colleges and universities, that were abusing drugs and alcohol. And Chase was influenced by those people. He was not exposed to any of that, in his upbringing, but he began to abuse drugs and alcohol along with them. And so by the second semester of his freshman year, his grades were so bad, and all, he just was kicked out of college. Had come back home. We had sent him to rehab. We did an intervention at our home for him
Really?
and got him into rehab. And after he had been in rehab, it was 30 days, we went to a halfway house, had come back home, had gotten a job, was doing some better. He would attend IOP, intensive outpatient
Right.
care, 2 nights a week. I went with him some. We would do group sessions, and like I said, he was doing a lot better. I never had to remind him to go to IOP. I never had to force him to go to IOP. He wanted to go. He wanted to get better. And he was always there, always on time. And like I said, then he was doing a lot better. But then at some point I began to see some subtle changes in him. And I picked up on the fact that he was beginning to relapse. So he came to me one day and said, "Dad, I'm hanging around a bad crowd again. And I know that they're taking me in a bad direction, and I need to get away from these people, and I really don't know how." That's all right. I really don't know how to cut ties with them. And so as a result of that, he told me, he said, "I'm going to move back down to Florida where I was in rehab." And there was an older gentleman that he had been in rehab with there who had a place for him to stay, was offering him a place to stay. And so he was going to move in with him. Well, the day that he was supposed to leave, he told my wife that he promised her that he would come by and have a meal with us before he left. And it was getting late in the afternoon, and we hadn't heard from him. We were trying to text him, trying to call him, and we weren't getting any response. We were all in the living room watching television when I got a phone call from a friend of mine. So I didn't want to disturb my wife and our other son, and so I went out in the front yard to take my telephone call, and was talking to my friend out there, and we were actually even talking about Chase. It was a beautiful day. It was May the 29th, and beautiful sunny afternoon. And so I'm out there on the telephone when a police cruiser drove up out front.
Right.
And the officer got out, walked around the front of his car, and I told my friend, I said, "Chase is in some kind of trouble. I've got to go." So I hung up and started down the driveway, met this officer halfway down the driveway, and it was there that he told me there had been a really bad wreck out on I-40 and that Chase had been killed at the scene.
Oh, wow.
And he accompanied me. I went inside to tell my wife and our other son, and once we were able to get over the shock and regain our composure a little bit,
Right.
we began to ask him what happened. And he told us that Chase had been a passenger in the front seat of his own car. And this young lady that was driving, she was 18 years old. She'd never had a driver's license. Apparently, she came over on someone who was in her blind spot. The driver of that car blew the horn, and apparently it startled her because we know that she lost control of Chase's car at that point. She was traveling, they were traveling at about 70 miles per hour. When she lost control, they spun out, they slid off the road, and they hit a tree. And when they hit the tree, they were traveling about 60 miles per hour. The car impacted on the driver's side rear door, and then it flipped up. It just wrapped around the tree, and the roof was crushed. Chase was wearing a seatbelt. He was the only occupant wearing a seatbelt. But just right where he happened to be sitting, took most of the impact, and it killed him instantly. It took the firefighters about an hour, almost an hour, to get the 3 occupants out of the vehicle. And so after this happened, I decided, it took me a little while, but I decided I would write a book, and I started writing. Well, in the meantime, this young lady, her court date was coming up. And just a few weeks prior to her court date, 7 months after the wreck, she took her own life.
That's just, I can't imagine what she was thinking that whole time, being responsible for something like that, taking your son's life. Did her family know that she was feeling so emotional about it?
I don't think so. I know that she had her personality was such that she had a lot of. She was very up and down.
Yeah.
She had very
So it's
extreme
normal
highs
for-
and
yeah,
lows.
right.
Yeah.
I don't know how as a parent you hear what you're supposed to look for, but I don't know how you do it because you don't want to admit it or won't want to see it. So
Well, and what's so tragic, I think, about this particular incident is that he wasn't the one behind the wheel, right? And even though it was his vehicle,
That's right.
and he, as far as my understanding from reading the book, didn't have any substances in his bloodstream, and so by all intents and purposes, he wasn't doing anything wrong.
Well, they didn't test him because he wasn't the driver. My understanding is, and this is hearsay, but I think it's probably accurate. I heard this from some of his friends that apparently there was a going away party the night before, and there were all kind of drugs and alcohol available, and apparently he partook in that, and so he and another friend were feeling really not well the
Right,
next morning, and so they went to a local park to smoke some marijuana to help with some of the nausea they were feeling. At some point, the young lady joined them. I don't know if she partook in that or not, but then somewhere there's in that time frame, she joined them and she got behind the wheel and drove out to I-40, and then there was rush hour traffic, and
there's some element of this that we may never know, just because she could have been the designated driver for this situation, and maybe she was in better shape to drive than the other two were, and you never know.
that was kind of my thinking.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say.
So it's just a difficult situation all around, and I think from reading the book, it seems like it's really a story about your family. You explain what happened, in the accident, and then your feelings afterward and how you dealt with it. But a lot of the story is really about your family and saying, by all intents and purposes, is a normal family, and how does this type of thing happen to anybody? It can happen to anybody. And I think, is that what you were trying to convey to readers, or is there more? Like, what was the message that you were trying to
There's
get?
so many messages
Yeah.
in there, so many good messages. But yes, that's definitely one of the main messages I was trying to get across, that this can happen to anyone. It really knows no socioeconomic boundaries. Addiction can happen to any family. And I think there are a lot of parents out there who probably think, no, that'll never happen to my family, that'll never happen to my child. And they're probably not aware of the dangers and the influences that their children are facing on a daily basis.
I think I read somewhere where you were also trying to give a glimpse into the modern drug culture And that must have been an eye-opener for you.
was an
Because you
eye-opener.
want to talk about being, blind. I have no clue. And how did you even, just from talking to his friends, and how did you get a sense for what is this culture that's out there that our kids are dealing with? It's
little-
everywhere, isn't it?
Yes, it is everywhere, and a little bit from, just things I've looked at online, just research online, but more so from just attending IOP with Chase and seeing other young people in IOP and hearing their stories and their parents' stories, and then dealing directly with some of his friends. The young man that I took in and tried to help, there was a friend of his that I tried to help and actually sent to rehab.
Wow.
And he lived with us for a while. And just talking to him and getting to know some of his friends who were mutual friends of Chase,
Right.
I really felt like I didn't completely get immersed into it, but I got to know these kids on a fairly personal level, and so I was able to kind of see somewhat what their life is like.
And I thought that was so amazing that you formed this connection with a friend of Chase that you kind of knew they were friends through social media, but didn't realize the level of connection that they had until you met with this young man and started talking and realized how much he actually knew Chase, because there was things that he picked up, even mannerisms that you could tell that Chase had picked up from him and he had picked up from Chase. And things that he knew about Chase that you wouldn't know unless you were very
That's
close
right.
friends with him.
That's right.
And I thought that was a really interesting thing. First, that you even took the initiative to get to know this person, but also that you realized in getting to know them how much they actually knew your son.
Initially when I decided to meet with him, I was very angry with him because I felt like he had been a really bad influence on Chase, just from what I had seen online. And so I wasn't sure how that meeting was going to go, really. But after I met with him and talked with him, my heart just sort of melted, and I just wanted to help him. And anyhow, I felt like I would say he was not. Chase had some really good friends who were good influences. He was not one of those, but it's still, his life has value, and I just wanted to try to help him, but he just wasn't ready for help, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it seems like he knew that he needed help, but he wasn't quite ready to accept it, maybe.
That's right.
And he was kind of stuck in that in-between stage of, knowing that he needed help but not quite ready to accept it.
That's very accurate. Trying to help him get all of the documents together that he needed and get everything together that he needed to be able to go into treatment, as simple as that may sound, was a huge challenge. Just finding his ID, finding his medical records, it was a huge
Wow.
thing for him. Just the things that you and I take for granted that we do in everyday life, those are big obstacles for him. A lot of times he doesn't know where he's going to spend the night. He doesn't know where his next meal is coming from. I had calls from him. I'm in the hospital. I'm at the emergency room in this hospital. Can you come get me? And I said, sure, I'll come get you. What happened? I don't know. I woke up with a fat lip. That's one of the
what a
stories.
life. How awful.
He called me in the middle of the night. One of my friends is out in the woods somewhere behind this neighborhood. He's ODing on fentanyl. He keeps calling me, but he passes out while he's on the phone. I don't know where he is. I don't have any transportation. Can you come help me find him?
Right.
These are the kind of stories,
Yeah.
that I have in association with him.
And having gone through that already with your son, it would almost seem like from reading the book that you're kind of reliving some of that with this young man, and having similar struggles about where's the line between loving and enabling,
That's true.
and where does tough love step in and say, hey, we can't, we have to say no because you're not getting the message or you're not making changes that are positive.
That's a good point, and that's a fine line sometimes that parents walk. We at one point locked Chase out. I mean, he had been gone. He got to the point where he was gone for longer and longer periods of time without communicating with us, and we had let him know that the rules were that he had to communicate with us and let us know where he was and when he would be back, and he wasn't following the rules. And so he came home one day. He had been gone for 3 days. We didn't know where he was, and I wouldn't let him in, and that was really difficult to do. And there are different levels of enabling. Some parents are really bad about enabling their children, and you just have to really be careful about that.
Yeah, and I know this is a really difficult question, but is there anything you would have done differently as a parent, or is there anything that you encourage other parents to do, to help their kids through struggling with things like this?
I'm sure there are a lot of little things I would have done differently. I spent a lot of time with Chase, unlike a lot of dads. I was a stay-at-home dad for a while, and I spent a lot of time with him. So it wasn't a matter of not spending enough time with him and trying to relate to him. I think there are things. There's a lot. Parenting is a lot different with a teenager than with a preteen or younger. And if you've never been down that road before, it can be very challenging. And he's beginning to get to that point where he'd never lied to us before growing up, and now all of a sudden he's telling us things that are making us wonder, if he's telling the truth. And I was catching him in some lies, and so it just becomes very difficult to know how to deal with certain things. If a child's being disrespectful, do you demand that they respect you? Yes, you have to have a certain amount of respect from your child, but I think sometimes you get into, Chase and I would get into a battle of the wills, if you will, and it would get pretty heated, and I've learned that sometimes I have to just sort of, back down a little bit and try to think of a way to solve the issues without letting it get too heated. Does that make sense?
And I can understand that, as I'm a very strong-willed person, and if my dad and I got into, as a teenager, an argument, I was holding my ground.
Right.
I was not going to give an inch.
That's my youngest son.
Yeah. And so some people, I think some kids, and it's difficult because you got to know your kid, right? And some kids respond to you putting the foot down in a positive way, and some will withdraw if you put the foot. And you got to know your kid to know that.
I think you guys talked about it a few minutes ago when you said they have to be ready.
Right, and they have to be ready.
And I don't know how much you could or could not have done, because if they're not ready to accept it, to accept the love, to accept the guidance, and I don't know what you could have done, right? So I need to ask you, because with everything we're talking about, what made you become a motivational speaker, to take everything you've learned and say, maybe I can help other kids? Because that's quite a leap given your background.
Right.
Flying airplanes and,
Right.
and all of a sudden being out on a stage in front of an audience from different ages too, because you do teenagers, but I think also you do adults as well, correct? So
Right.
that's a different presentation in a church versus a Chamber of Commerce. So how did you learn to do that?
That's something that's relatively new for me, and it doesn't necessarily come very easy for me by nature. I'm a very quiet and shy person by nature, although one-on-one I'm very friendly with people, but growing up I was scared to death to get out on a stage and get in front of people. So, for one thing, I have a message to share, and so that passion drives me to overcome that apprehension. That's part of it. A while back, I realized that was a fear that I needed to overcome. Public speaking was a fear that I needed to overcome to help me grow as a person. And so I found out about an organization called Toastmasters.
Oh, yes, of
And
course.
I joined the Toastmasters
Yep.
Club. I was a member for 3 years, and I was the president of that club for a year. And it really helped me a lot with my speaking. if for no other reason, it gave me more confidence as a speaker. And so coming into this, I drew from some of that Toastmasters
right.
experience to help me with my public speaking.
That's great. We have a very active group of Toastmasters here in Washington County, so we know about that. That's great. So then you just well, I know you have an incredible website, and the name is very interesting as well, and that probably helped you get the word out, but maybe you could explain the website, and it's named after Chase, of course, but.
The website is speedy34.com, and where that came from, Chase got the nickname his senior year of high school. His coach, in a preseason article about the football team, a newspaper article at the local paper where their team was, he called him the Speedy Chase Rogers,
Oh, cool.
the Speedy Chase Rogers. And so the kids at school started calling him Speedy, and it stuck. And he kind of liked it, you know, and so at one point he got a license tag. Probably wasn't the best idea, but he got a license tag that was Speedy 34, right?
The cops won't notice that.
Right, yeah. But it was on a Toyota Corolla.
Oh,
you know,
that can't go fast
Yeah.
anyway, right?
But his tag, his jersey number, his senior year of high school was 34.
Oh,
So
nice.
that's where the 34
Nice.
comes from. And
Yeah.
now his younger brother, he's a senior in high school now, and he plays
Oh,
football
does
too.
he wear the number?
He wears his number.
Oh, that's great. That's great. It's a great website. You should check it out. A lot of information. So obviously the motivational speaking is going well because you've been keeping very busy.
I think I've done more speaking engagements in this last week than I've done in all the months
Well,
previous.
because you have 3 or 4 more engagements here in Vermont.
Right.
So maybe we'll get this on the internet quickly so people can maybe catch you, because I would think this must be a very moving presentation. Do you get good feedback from, you get different feedback from grown-ups and from the teenage, or are they all the same ideas and thoughts and questions?
The difference, I think, is that invariably it seems that in every crowd of grown-ups that I speak to, that I will get 1 or 2 who will come up to me and tell me about all of the parallels
Oh,
in my story to their own story. And it's amazing the commonalities that we have. And they go, wow, I can't believe, thank you so much for speaking out about this, because you don't know all the things that you said, how they resonated with me and what
Right.
I've been through with my own child, or sometimes in their own life, you know.
yeah.
I get a lot of hugs and a lot of thank yous, and that really means a lot to me.
That's great.
I was amazed. I found parallels in my own family with your story, and I don't have a family member with addiction problems, which is incredible to me. But I found it very relatable and easy to approach, which I think is partially your intent in writing it. Is it was a very easy to approach book, and it was easy to relate to, and I found just the storytelling in it to be valuable, because it helped me, as you know, again, as someone who doesn't have, or at least I'm not aware of a family member with an addiction problem, to understand what a family goes through when they're dealing with an issue like that.
Could you, I guess I don't know if this is the right question, but was peer pressure for Chase the thing that started him down this route? Because certainly not in his home life. It sounded like he had a very supportive, very structured life. And was it the peer pressure mostly? Because that's something I think parents really need to really worry about, and they don't have much control over it either.
I think the peer pressure was the biggest factor. And, you know, you wonder why kids sometimes cave in to peer pressure. And I think there are a lot of different factors why kids do that, and I think there are a lot of different factors as to why they start using drugs. It's different for different kids, but definitely the peer pressure had a lot to do with it. I think sometimes when a kid is struggling with confidence issues, which a lot of young people
Right.
do, because they're still trying to figure things out, at that age. And when they're struggling with confidence issues, then they tend to cave to the peer pressure more.
Well, and I don't know how you control it as a parent.
Right.
And it's even like the bullying, I mean, all kinds of things are happening in school, which I don't think teachers can, I don't know how much they really can do in the school setting, but the kid comes home and how do you deal with it? It's really scary.
So what's your message about the use of substances? I mean, we've had a discussion here in Vermont for several years. Governor Shumlin, the previous governor, famously spent his entire State of the State address talking about the opiate issue here in Vermont, and kind of set off a conversation across the country about it in some ways. And it's something that every state, every corner of the country, every socioeconomic class is struggling with. And now here in Vermont, we're having discussion about whether or not we should legalize recreational use of marijuana. I think there's plenty of data out there about the dangers of opiates and other substances, even prescription painkillers. But what do you say, to young people about not just opiates but marijuana and other drugs? How do you address that?
When I talk to the young people, I talk about making wise choices, and I mostly talk about, I use a superpower speech. That's what I call it. And I talk about superheroes, and because Chase was a big fan of superheroes, and so I can relate to them well that way. And so I tell them there are 4 superpowers that they all have in common, and they're the power of choice, the power of association, the power of love, and the power to intervene. And so, it was really the choices that Chase made and the associations that he had in college that got him off track. But the love comes in that, if you really love someone, you don't want to see them die. You don't want to see them make choices that can have a really bad negative impact on their future. And so you need to have the courage to intervene, which is the
Right.
4th superpower. Have the courage to intervene in that situation if you're a young person, and prevent them, try to prevent them from making those bad choices that can hurt them. But as far as dealing with the substances, marijuana was a big issue in Chase's life. And I know right now the opioid epidemic is getting all of the headlines, but the truth of the matter is that marijuana is a gateway drug. If for no other reason than when you're hanging around with people who are smoking marijuana, you're smoking marijuana, you are around people who have access to other drugs and will eventually experiment with other drugs. And so it's definitely a gateway drug. I saw what it did to Chase was that I saw it kill his ambition. He had dreams, he had aspirations, he was a very active kid, and all of a sudden now he just wanted to sleep until noon and get up for a few hours, do a few things, and then go out and party all night, and come back and sleep until noon again. It just no ambition to really do anything.
And do you know what kind of drugs he was using?
Well, it started with alcohol and marijuana, and when I made a film, about his life, and what we did was we interviewed his friends, and at least 2 of the friends that we interviewed, and this doesn't really come out in the film, but I do have them on video. They said that Chase, the main thing he did was marijuana. That was his main thing. He experimented with a few other drugs, but always came back to marijuana. The young lady who was driving the car, the police found marijuana in her purse. They found a THC metabolite in her bloodstream, and yet, because of the way the legal system is, and because of the fact that marijuana doesn't stay in the bloodstream long, they weren't going to be able to get a conviction. She was going to be able to walk away, basically, with no punishment at all. And so, I would ask the audience to think about who is the one person in your life that you really love the most, and think about if that person if you lost that person, how would that make you feel? And then to know that someone else's negligence is what resulted in the loss of that person that you love would you want that person to just walk away with no consequences at all under our legal system? I don't think that's right. And right now, the way things are set up, that's happening quite a bit. Because by the time they draw the blood, usually at least 2 to 3 hours have passed, and the THC levels
gone
have
down.
dropped in the bloodstream, and that's exactly what happened in our case. Sadly,
Yeah, because there's well, of course, in this case, after the accident, they probably had to do something later, but they don't have a way to test for marijuana on the scene, do they? I mean, it's not like alcohol where you
Right.
breathe in and it measures the percentage, but I don't think they've actually come up with something for the speeder or the guy behind the wheel.
they're working on some things
Yeah,
right
I
now,
hope
but
they
there's
do.
nothing currently
Yeah.
widely available.
Because they have to
that-
do blood tests.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is, the DRE, the drug recognition expert, who is a trained
Oh, yeah,
law
right.
enforcement
Yeah.
officer. Sometimes their testimony can carry some weight in court, but in a lot of cases, such as ours, she was trapped in the car for an hour, and when they got her out of the car, they had to get her to the hospital right away. So the DRE could not make an assessment on her.
I always figure that he said, she said, under that scenario. We have a lot of our officers trained to do that, and I just hope that works, because it just seems, it could be a he said, she said scenario. So anyway, you mentioned the film, and you using that as part of your presentation in your speaking. I bet it's very powerful to hear from the kids, the friends of your son.
I think it does resonate a lot
Yeah.
with the young people, and that's the main reason that I made the film was, and I say I made it, it was my idea, but I had a lot of help from
Yeah.
people. I did most of the editing myself with some help. I did a lot of the videography myself, but there certainly are a lot of people who helped me out with that. But yeah, the whole idea was that, I can relate to the kids pretty well, but at the end of the day, I'm just some old guy standing up there on the stage, right? But when they can hear from people close to their own age, and they hear from Chase's friends that actually saw the impact on his life from the use of marijuana, then it makes an impact on them. It's a very emotional film. It really pulls at the heartstrings,
I think I told you before the show, I knew a young lady, 2 accidents. First accident, she was enabled by family members to not have any charges against her. So she took on this air of invincibility. And she said a lot of her friends, they just have this, I'm 17, I'm invincible. And the second accident left her pretty damaged. She's doing great, but still a lot of damage and not so invincible anymore.
Right.
Do they give that impression to you of, I'm invincible, I'm a teenager, or do they get the message, I hope?
Yeah, I think they all have that. I think that's just, I remember feeling that way when I was a teenager,
Right.
And so I think that's just something that is innate in teenagers, but a certain percentage of them, you can tell, get the
Get it?
message.
Good.
Yeah.
So you have a younger son you mentioned earlier, and your wife. How did they handle Chase's death, and how did they grieve? I think for you it seemed like the book was part of your grieving process, but how did they process what happened to Chase?
It's been very difficult for my wife. She was already, as I mentioned earlier, about the grieving that a parent goes through when the child is going through addiction. It started for her with that. And she actually exhibited physical symptoms. She began to have leg jerks, and we couldn't figure out what was causing it, and it wasn't restless leg syndrome. She went to see all kinds of neurologists, some of the best around, and they just went through a process of elimination, and finally they said, it's just stress. And I think most of the stress was coming from Chase's situation, and because it started about the same time. And she still has a little bit of an issue with that, but for the most part, that has subsided. Seems like it's worse as she's trying to sleep at night. It's about the time she's about ready to fall asleep. But it can happen middle of the day sometimes. Also, she would, how when someone is they're crying and they're gasping for breath, this quick, short gasp of breath. She has those at times, and it just comes over all of a sudden, but there's no tears to accompany that. But she and I both, we joined a support group called Compassionate Friends. We went to some of their meetings. We've stopped with that, but she also attended a support group called Grief Share, and that seems to have been the most helpful for her. Different things work for different people.
Sure.
As far as Justin goes, Chase's younger brother, he, younger people are very resilient. Of course, he misses Chase. I think, wearing his number.
Yeah, that's great. That's very nice. That's
Yeah.
nice.
That really means a lot to
Yeah.
him. And it was really nice of the football coaches
Yeah.
from his freshman year. They guaranteed him. They knew the story. They said, this is your jersey
Oh,
number
nice.
all the way through high school.
Good for him.
That's great.
That's good.
That's really great that they did that for
Yeah.
him. And is he? I know that people who have family members, parents or other family members that have addiction problems, oftentimes distance themselves as far away from any kind of substance, even alcohol and whatnot. Has he expressed any of that, where he doesn't want to get anywhere near
Oh, yes.
those types of things?
Yes, he's very outspoken about that. He's very selective with his friends. He has a really good group of friends, and he's a good student, good athlete, good head on his shoulders, doesn't get in any kind of trouble at all. And he has recently on social media, not too long ago, I saw where he spoke out, basically said, I'm playing for my brother. I'm playing football. When I play, he is on my mind, and he drives me to be better on the football field. And but he also used that as a platform to talk about the drug abuse and to say, look, you don't want to go down that road, because I've seen what it can lead to. So, well, I'm really proud of him that he has stepped up
That's great.
and taken that on.
That's great. I noticed that on the website also, you've expanded all the things that you're doing. You have a long list of articles that you've written, and you didn't mention the hunting part of your background.
Right.
Because this is, you've got a couple of articles that really relate, I think, to what we're talking about here. It's almost like you've taken on the aura of a life coach, because you've got the 7 keys to lasting motivation. I got me some attitude. I like that one. 5 tips to overcoming shyness and 5 ways to head off depression. And then you go into a lot of things about hunting and that sort of thing. But you seem to be expanding and reaching out even beyond the motivational speaking and trying to give a structure to the whole discussion.
I wrote those a while back, and I was thinking at the time, I was thinking about going into life coaching, and I have not done that at this time, but I have been thinking really about going into life coaching recently. I've been thinking about that more, and about specializing in working with parents who are grieving over the loss of a child. or
Because
maybe
your one on depression was really excellent.
Thank you.
And I read it. I've read all these. I didn't read the hunting one. I will someday. But I thought the discussion about depression was really on point, and
Well,
it was
thank you.
very impactful. So you should do that. You have a lot to say. And sadly, you've been through a horrible experience, which would help to help people.
I love people.
Yeah.
I love people, and so I like to listen to people. And I don't always have all of the answers, but I can be a good listener.
Well, I think that's what people need, just recognition that somebody else is sharing the problem with them. I think I find I usually try, like, whatever question I'm asking, somebody else has got to have it,
Right.
the question. So I'll ask, and you'll be able to share the answer, which is a good thing. How long are the large crowds? Are they turning out for you as far as the kids and the adults? Do they have a large crowd to speak to?
Pretty good sized crowd,
Is it?
especially at the schools. Yeah, the
That's
schools have
great.
been really good sized crowds.
Good, because that's where it all happens with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, do you have any, this peer pressure thing is sticking in my head this whole hour. How do you get through the peer pressure? How do you do that? What's the answer?
I'm glad you asked that question. I mean, there are a couple of different things I'd like to address there. One is the heart issue, and for me, that has a lot to do with my faith. You know, and I think you can talk about the numbers all day long, the facts, the science behind it, but until you reach the heart of the kids, you really until they know that you care about
Right,
them, that you
right.
really are genuine and really care about them, they don't want to hear all of that. And so I think that's where we start. What was the other part of your question? Oh, the other thing I wanted to address was this. There are schools out there now that are called recovery high schools.
Oh,
And what they're doing is they're using positive peer pressure in these schools for children
I
that are.
actually read about that, yeah.
There's one about to start up in North Carolina, from my understanding.
Yeah.
It will be the first one in North Carolina. But what they're doing with these schools is they're using the positive peer pressure and the accountability. They're
Right.
holding each other accountable. These are all children who've had a drug problem.
Yeah,
So my thought is, and it's sort of been my thought before I ever found out about this, but now I'm really thinking this way, and I've got some good ideas about this, but I'm not sure exactly how to get it done. But my idea is this: if we can do that after the fact, why can't we do that beforehand? Why can't we create a culture in our schools of positive peer pressure? Why can't we foster that positive peer pressure to prevent a lot of this from happening in the
Right.
first place? Because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of
Right,
cure.
right.
It's so hard once a child makes that decision and starts down that path. It's so hard to get them back. So
because
many.
all kids are looking for is recognition and acceptance, right? So
Right.
if they actually get it from their peers, oh, that's really amazing. I wish you good luck with that, because that's a great
Thank you.
message.
Yeah, it's a great concept.
Serious.
And if you come up with the answer,
Yeah, well, let us
us know. So one of the things, one of the things I wanted to ask, and we're running a little bit low on time, but in 30 seconds, what would you tell a parent who has a child they suspect or know has an addiction problem? What would you tell them to do?
First, that's a big
Really?
one. That's a tall order. But just first, you have to sit down and have an honest discussion with the child. And they may not open up to you completely, but you have to have a level of trust there. So you can't come at them angry. You can't come at them in a judgmental or a condemning tone. It has to be a loving approach that you take to that child, and try to gradually. You should hopefully have established a relationship with that child over time that leads to an element of trust through spending time with that child, doing things that they enjoy doing. And so then you have an opening, hopefully, to talk to that child a little bit more. But if you have to get them into treatment, get them into treatment, get them whatever help that you can. But you, as a parent, you have to be a part of that process, because you can't just farm them out and send them to treatment and think that they're going
Right.
to fix your child for you. You have to be part of the solution.
So Daryl, with all the issues, if I know my child is struggling, where do I go? I mean, I have no clue. What's available for me to help me through this?
You know, there are a lot of different resources out there. There is one that I would like to mention. I looked at it for Chase. We wound up, there were a lot of different reasons why. At the time I didn't have enough information.
Right.
But Teen Challenge is a good resource if the child is going into treatment. A lot of these places that people go for rehab, there's a 30-day program. 30 days is not enough to fix a problem like this. So the Teen Challenge program, it's at least 12 months, and that's
Oh,
what
wow.
children need. It's also faith-based, and it's because of that, it's a very affordable program compared to most other programs out
Now,
there.
then you said we have one here in Vermont?
There is one here in Vermont. I'm not quite sure where it's located, but I'm sure if you Google it, you can find.
We should do a program on that. We've committed to the woman who's looking at the opiate issue to do quite a few shows on drug addiction, and we should bring them in as part of that series.
Yeah, and there's also every county in Vermont has a designated agency, and you can find that information if you search online. You can find your designated agency for your county, and they offer counselors and stuff like that as well,
Great.
Depending on what your situation is.
Cool. I have about a minute left. Have we not covered something you wanted to cover?
You know, I did want to mention that, we were talking about the marijuana being a gateway drug.
Yeah.
If you go to any treatment center anywhere, you would be hard pressed to find any addict of harder drugs, heroin, cocaine, whatever it is, that didn't start out with alcohol and marijuana. Marijuana is a common theme with all of them. If you sit down and talk to them, you'll find out that's the story. So yeah, I would just say to the people out there, please, I know that we're coming up on a
It's coming
vote
back
here.
this legislative session, and
Yes, that please talk to your legislators and ask them to vote no. Ask them to not pass this legalization,
Right.
because we don't need to send a message to the kids that this drug is okay for them.
yeah, they falsely think it's going to be a way to reduce taxes or make lots of money, but at what cost?
The costs far outweigh any tax
Right.
revenue, and that's
Thank you
been
very
proven.
much for joining us, Daryl. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much.
you for tuning
Thanks,
in.
Ben.
We'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.